So started going to church every day at the 7 a.m. Mass, and it's where I found God again. And I think that was really like my turning point in everything. Um, when I really started to realize that I was on a path. I wasn't sure at that time exactly what the path was, but I knew I was heading somewhere. I just had to let go and let God and get there.
Welcome back, everyone. You are listening to the Truth That Heals podcast. I'm here with a dear friend of mine, Kellie, host of the Unbroken Podcast, for a follow-up. Welcome back, Kellie. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, and it's great to have you back. Thank you for
Thanks for
coming.
having me back.
Yes, our last interview that I had with you, I had a lot of feedback, and a lot of people were letting me know that they were not aware of these conditions which you were talking about in the last episode. And for those who aren't aware, you were sharing your story of trafficking, which for some
Yes.
people it is just something that they see in the movies, but here you came and really talked about the reality of it. So thank you for enlightening not only myself but also many people in the audience.
Thank you. And that's essentially why I started to share my story, because it was it was just so bizarre to hear so many people talking about my trauma, but not actually talking about my trauma.
Mhm.
So I started sharing because I wanted to put a face to trafficking and to share the reality of it, because it's not what people expect it to be or what they read about on social media or things like that.
Yes, and the interesting thing about your story is that, after you got out of it, you've been on a journey. You've been
A
doing
long one.
a long one, yes,
Yeah.
but you've been doing your podcast, you've been bringing awareness, but this didn't happen overnight after you left that life. Can you share with us because in the last episode, you shared with us the journey of being in that environment. For this episode, can you guide us into what life has been after leaving that lifestyle, after leaving that dark environment? What was different when you left?
Well, it was really difficult. Because I had tried escaping a while before the final escape, and I was in constant contact with the domestic violence shelter. And at this time in my life, I thought that it was just domestic violence that I was experiencing. I wasn't fully aware that it was called sex trafficking. So I found out pretty early on that I actually did not meet the qualifications to get into the emergency shelter. And it drove me crazy because they said that I was an adult and it was my parents, so I could leave at any time. There was nothing holding me back. And I'm just like, how is that not true from women that are escaping abusive husbands?
Mhm.
And when it comes down to it, it's funding. They don't have a nearly enough funding or nearly enough room. And at the time, my escape trafficking wasn't as talked about as it is now. But there were extenuating circumstances that I don't really feel comfortable talking about, but they did make an exception for me and my daughters to get into the shelter, which we stayed at for we got there September 24th and we left a couple days before Halloween. and I got into the transitional living program, which was hard. I had to be in school or working, which I was doing both at the time. And the closest bus stop was a mile away. I had two kids. One was in preschool, the other was in kindergarten. So I was getting up at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning just to be able to catch the bus to drop them off and keep hopping back and forth on different buses to get myself to school. And it was a good program to be in, but eventually I started struggling with addiction and with some mental health issues, I guess you can say. So I signed myself into a dual diagnosis. Like it's like the psychiatric ward, except it's also for addiction, but it's for mental health
Mhm.
reasons too. So my daughters, I had a choice to put them either into foster care or send them to their father, which I chose to send them to their father, which at the time seemed like a great idea, but it ended up being a massive mistake. So when I got out of the unit, um I was just thrown on the streets. Wasn't eligible to be in the program anymore because I didn't have my children. And so yeah, it was the beginning of a very long journey of being homeless. So, and I'm talking like under a bridge in Florida during like thunderstorm
Yeah.
season, like that kind of homeless. And it was very humbling. I will give it that. I met a lot of really great people that turned out to be a family. We all looked out for each other. We all cared about each other. If we were able to do some kind of side job and make a little bit of money, we would buy um like a pizza for everyone or cake, but most of the time it was eating at soup kitchens and spending a lot of time at the library. I was one of the only places that they didn't really kick homeless people out. But I mean, I got trespassed from a lot of places just because they knew that I was living on the streets. And I eventually left the state and it just continued. I couldn't find a place that was home um until I met my current husband, and we lived at our house for just a couple of years, and then we were homeless until about just over 4 years ago. So for the majority of the 13 and a half years since I left, I was homeless.
So, going back, you were trafficked, then you were able to leave, and now you're in this predicament where it's hard to get by from what you're
Yeah.
sharing. Um, was
And
there ever,
oh, go
uh,
ahead.
was there ever a point where you in that dark period where you regretted leaving and maybe thought I should have stayed?
Hmm. A lot. And I mean, I don't know if I would use the word regret,
Mm,
but I definitely, it was on my mind a lot. I could just, especially after my daughters were with their father, I kind of didn't care if I lived or died for a long time. So in that time period, it would just be easier to go back. I'd have a roof over my head. Yeah, a lot of horrible, fucked up shit would happen, but at least I wouldn't be scared to get struck by lightning while I was sleeping.
mhm.
It's
So
really weird saying that out loud.
no, no, I mean, so what was going through your mind? What were you thinking that helped you get through this dark period? Because I can imagine uh, it's a place where people, really have strong depression, and sadly, with depression, things can get darker and darker. What helped you to hold on? Like, what thoughts did you have to keep you strong?
Well, after a while, while I was still in Florida, I got certified to be an advocate. So I did do some volunteer work, which kind of gave me purpose. Um, in the midst of all of that, I got kidnapped and trafficked by someone different. And then that's a whole other story. Um, so escaping that situation just kind of added to the, feeling that I had inside that I was nothing without them. And it felt like they were being proven right. The whole time they would say no one would love you, no one would take you in, no one would care about you. You're nothing without us. So it was a struggle to try to keep it in my head that, okay, they're not right. Just because my circumstances are terrible right now doesn't make them any more right about what they're saying. But I kept pushing through. I had some really great friends that helped out along the way, and I couch surfed for a little bit, did a whole bunch of other stuff, but it was, I had to keep reminding myself that as much as it feels like it would be easier to go back, it wasn't normal and it wasn't okay behavior, and I would not survive if I did.
Uh, you mentioned that you started doing volunteer work, and
Hmm.
you said something like you were sort of finding purpose.
Yeah.
Um, what was it uh, that helped you find purpose outside of just that project? Were there other things that you needed to do, activities, or maybe something else to find purpose in life? Because it's really, from your background, that's really a dark place.
Hmm. I actually, and I don't want to trigger any of your listeners. I somehow made my way to Connecticut and I found an AA meeting that met every day at noon, and they were great people. I got my 90-day chip there, which happened to be a year or an entire year after I got my white chip, which is the surrender chip where you're basically starting the AA process. So it took an entire year to stay sober and clean for 90 days in a row. But they were great, old people, a lot of old vets, and they were so welcoming and they didn't care. Like you could sit there and be like, you know what? I just want to leave this meeting and use right now. And you were it was accepted to say that. Like they almost wanted you to say that so they could help to talk you through that. And I also started going to church every day at the 7 a.m. Mass. And it's where I found God again. And I think that was really like my turning point in everything. Um, when I really started to realize that I was on a path. I wasn't sure at that time exactly what the path was, but I knew I was heading somewhere. I just had to let go and let God and get there.
Before you started going to 7 a.m. mass, did you have a relationship with your faith, or was God just something that you didn't connect with?
No, I always did, even throughout the trafficking. I mean, I went to Catholic school, so I got to learn about the Catholic faith on a more personal level than a lot of people do because we learned about it in school. Um, I had some pretty awesome nuns for teachers, which like amazes my husband that I've seen a real live nun. I'm like, as opposed to a fictional one.
Yeah.
He saw one at the store once and went crazy. I'm like, I'm sorry, sister. But I did, and I always was a faithful person. I mean, I don't think there was a time that I didn't believe that he existed, but there was a time where I had turned away and was shutting him out. And that was during the trafficking and after I had left. But when I made it to Connecticut, it was uh probably about a year and a half after I had escaped, and that's when I finally found my way back. And I wouldn't say like I'm like a crazy religious person. I don't go to church
Mhm.
every week now, but I do have a very good relationship. At least I think. I don't know. I probably piss him off a lot. But it,
Can
it was it was amazing. There were two masses that really hit me. I had a good friend of mine that had liver cancer, and I, prayed before the mass started and was like, he's getting this procedure, please. He's in so much pain, free him of his pain and everything. And then the priest did his little thing and was like, you know, we can't just pray for someone's physical well-being, but we have to pray for their spiritual well-being. I'm like, I get it. Okay, my bad. Because it was like right after. And then the following mass was about the prodigal son. And as soon as the priest started reading it, I'm like, no, no. I'm like not doing that. But I don't think that's the message that he was sending. But um yeah, it was something constant to grab onto. There was so much chaos in every aspect of my life, so having that constant thing to always have there really helped.
Well, thank you. I didn't know that about you, that you would go to 7 a.m. mass, and he said you would do this every day
I don't anymore, but for a long
at the
time I
time.
did. Yeah. I
Uh,
was up until they closed the churches for COVID, and then once you get into the habit of being lazy, you kind of continue it.
no, that's actually kind of hard to go to mass every day. Some people, I still am Catholic. I don't really practice as much. I
Hmm.
don't go to mass all the time. But it's hard to get up and to attend, and you did that for a while. So, how did you feel entering the church and getting having a stronger prayer life and, let's say, a relationship with God? Did that help you in your, not only your spiritual journey, but did that also help you, like, maybe in your mental health journey, in your life journey?
Yeah, and I think honestly, I think it helped with my sobriety. When I left Florida was the last time I used, and I was on a plane and I crushed some pills up on the little TV tray and snorted them and looked up and was like, it's in your hands now. I can't do it. I'm not, I can't feel it. I'm not strong enough. Like, you got to help me. You got to carry me through this. And I've never touched it since. So, yeah, oh, sorry. My dog's a pain in the ass. Hi, baby. But yeah, like I said, it was just that constant thing to grab onto.
Okay, so you walked us through that period of getting through addiction, then you're finding now a relationship with your faith. Uh, what are some other difficulties that you had to face after leaving this world of trafficking that maybe the audience isn't aware of?
Well, the one thing is like, hold on. One of the hardest things I think was learning how to be a human, like a person again. It wasn't like I was ever taught how to function in society. So when I left and when I first escaped, the concept of, hey, go get a job and get an apartment just seemed so far away from me. And I didn't have an ID, I didn't have a social security card, I didn't have a birth certificate. I still can't locate a birth certificate. I don't even know what state I was born in at this point, it feels like. And so getting a job was kind of difficult, especially getting an apartment. I had no renter history. My credit was destroyed from identity theft. So it was just, I left one world and went into a completely different world. And that was very difficult. There's a misconception that when people escape sex trafficking, domestic violence, cults, and things like that, that they always have a family waiting for them with open arms to take them in and love them and so excited to see them again. But it's not always true. And if you look at statistics, it's more likely not true. So when I had escaped, I had nowhere to go. I had just friends. I couldn't trust anyone in my family, no job history, no rental history. So I was 26 years old, and it's like I went from one really fucked up world
Mhm.
to the real world, which was equally as fucked up in many ways, but I didn't know like the concept of getting a job, getting an apartment, getting a car it was so foreign to me
And,
because I was raised on being dependent on someone.
and like even opening a bank account, did you have difficulty doing that?
Actually like the first bank account that I had was a joint bank account with a friend. I wasn't even able to open my own bank account. So I had one with a friend, but God, I remember the guy that I dated uh, towards the end before I escaped and afterwards. I saw him using a debit card and I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. I
Mhm,
was
mhm.
like, wow, you have a debit card? Like it was just such a foreign thing to me, even a credit card, thinking about how like I have credit cards now and they're just so weird. Like I don't like to use them, but it's like I still feel fancy when I use it when I'm like, oh, do you want my credit card number? Like, what can I pay with a credit card? Like, I feel like I'm fancy, like some rich
Mhm,
person, even though I'm really not. Like, I have like
mhm.
a very low limit, but it was so many things that I think people take for granted every single day because it's just so common for them. But I mean, I didn't even have a cell phone. I didn't have a smartphone until I think it was 2012 is when I finally got a smartphone. But um I had to get a Metro PCS phone, which this was way back when, it wasn't what it was now, but I didn't even always have money to put minutes on the phone and it was just bizarre to be like thrown into this world where I had to be self-sufficient, but I was never taught how.
Well, you really hit on a lot of interesting points because for the rest of society, I mean, for like the regular the norm is you go to school, get an education, you get a job when you're like 16, you get your
And
first paycheck.
I did all of that. I mean, I worked 3 jobs when I was 16.
Okay.
I think they forced me to work, so when I had lavish items, it was a way to explain that away. But my paychecks went directly into my parents' bank accounts, and
Mm.
they gave me the money when I needed it, even at 26.
So for the longest time, even that was controlled, your own income.
Mhm.
See,
Yeah.
that's not what people go through. People my age now or your age, my age. If you ask
Mhm.
them what was their life like, oh, I went to school, got a job at 16, went to college, and things are normal.
Oh, college was
They have their bank accounts, then they get their house, and it's easy. And then many
mhm.
times, not always, but many times they have family support,
Yeah.
friends, and it's smooth sailing. And
Mhm.
I'm not trying to take anything away from them. That's the life that they have.
Good for them.
Good
I mean,
for them.
I got accepted into Juilliard for ballet, and they my father assaulted me and made sure that my knee got destroyed so I could never dance again. I mean, it was devastating. That was going to be my entire life. Then I wanted to join the army. I had this amazing plan for my life. I was going to join the army, be an MP, be a cop, become a detective to take down the bad guys. And they did a lot of things to make sure that I got felonies. So that threw that out the window. It was just like they sabotaged any plan that I had to be anything other than their victim. But when I finally did leave, I had all of these plans and like dreams of what things were going to be like, but I really had no idea how the world worked. Like there were so many things that were just so weird to me. Like the guy with the debit card, I just thought that was something fancy. I paid for
Mhm,
everything with cash.
mhm.
You know, my parents, most of the money they spent was quote unquote dirty money. So they never used debit cards. They didn't use banks. Like it was a rich person thing to me.
Mhm.
And now I yell at my bank all the time.
Mhm.
But it's still something I struggle with. I drive my husband crazy. Like the second we get paid, I pay all my bills, like every single bill, because that was another thing that they would control me with, was if I needed money for something, like for my daughter's field trip or something like that, they would hold it until the last minute to give me that panic. So I
Oh,
pay everything. I food shop on the day we get paid. Like I go from a big fat paycheck to like $20 in about 20 minutes. And I can't get out of it. I'm just too terrified not to pay everything right away. So
mhm.
I'm scared someone's going to take it. Not my husband, but my parents.
But
I'm still scared that they're going to do it.
it's understandable, your background. But when you're in that process of leaving and I guess finding your purpose, finding your life, you started making friends, meeting people. Was it
Mhm.
hard for you to tell your story? Were you quiet about it? Were you ashamed? Were you like ashamed? How was that communicating with strangers?
Well, for the I think it was the end of 2008. So for almost 2 years, I had been going to support groups before I escaped for domestic violence. So most of my friends were from there. And it was easy to talk about it as domestic violence. The first person that I ever talked about the trafficking with was my husband. We met and his best friend was my best friend's brother. So we started off as pen pals while he was deployed. And it was July 11th, 2010. Like, isn't it crazy that I remember that date? That's the
Yeah.
first time I told him. And I said that I put it in a way that they would do things to me and allow their friends to do stuff to me. Like that was at that point in time what I thought happened to me. And it wasn't until many years later when I found out that it was sex trafficking. So it's kind of like me and my husband found out together at the same time. Like I was sitting in the recliner, he was sitting on the couch, and I'm like, oh my God, it was sex trafficking. And he's like, what?
Mhm,
What was? And he like looks at the TV because I had the TV on.
mhm.
And I was like, do you remember what I told you? But so that was like kind of how that started. And there's still a lot of things I feel a lot ashamed talking about. The things that they would force me to do, things clients would force me to do, which I work on with my therapist. I work it out in my podcast. When I was going live on TikTok, every once in a while I would get into detail about things, but it's hard because I know that I know they're wrong, that no one will understand me, but they're right in a lot of ways because it's really hard to understand how much fear drives you to do things that you would never do. And it makes you feel like you're a bad person. And I know I'm not. I know I'm not to blame for the things that they did. Did what I had to do to survive. Even after my escape, I did some fucked up shit that I regret doing, but I had to. I didn't have a choice. I needed to survive somehow. So I mean, there is a lot of shame, but I think a lot of that kind of goes with the stigma of what sex trafficking is. And people, they just don't realize the world of sex trafficking. Like, it's just so complex. There's so many moving parts and moving pieces. And as long as they're looking at it as, well, a girl was taken from a Walmart and sent to an island in the Caribbean and then came back to her parents' house who loved her and missed her, and think that's what trafficking is, it's going to be harder for not just me, but other survivors to talk about it. Because, I mean, they say they want to know, but they really don't.
So as you started speaking up and sharing your story and, sharing your own journey of healing on your own podcast and, previously on TikTok, did you have a lot of people reaching out to you and
Mm-hmm.
asking maybe for guidance?
Yeah, and there was a lot of things that I thought was just specific to my situation, and I got tons of survivors that were teaching me new terms. Like the children that I had stolen right from birth is a very common thing in trafficking rings and is called breeding. I didn't know that until I talked about it one time and in a TikTok video, and I had message after message from survivors like, that happened to me, that happened to me. I also had it from the flip side too, where it was older women that, I mean, I'm 40 now, they were my age, that had no idea who their parents were. And they were, while they were going on their path to figure out who they were, found out that they were the product of sex trafficking and an illegal adoption. So it's so common. And I learned that from people reaching out to me. And I still have people to this day reach out that I talk with. I just had a woman message me on Instagram that was a makeup artist in LA. And I mean, I looked at her following, it was huge. So I'm like, I can't believe someone this huge is coming to me. But and they asked, they were like, is what I experienced trafficking? Like, they just don't know.
Yeah, and in our last episode, you really broke down like some of the signs of trafficking, like you were talking about, like at it can be like at a gas station, and you
Hmm.
you really broke it down. Do you think that you can break down what the healing journey looks like? Because there might be someone in the audience who is leaving a an environment like that, and they have no
Hmm.
idea what are the first steps, where to go for help, and maybe like you, they also don't have a family and just feel so lost and in despair. So, can you maybe give some advice of what steps uh, can be or should be taken to reach a better environment and have again purpose in life?
Number one, the hardest thing that I didn't even know I was looking for was my own validation that it wasn't my fault. Um, there were things that happened where I was like, okay, it's not my fault. They did what they did, but I should hold some responsibility because I knew who they were. I knew what they were doing. I put myself in that place and I had to let that go. And I had to find that validation for myself that none of it was my fault. It didn't matter if I knew who they were, I could not control them. And I think AA helped with that a lot, especially with the serenity prayer being one of the hugest things. And, you know, realizing they're going to do what they're going to do, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do. One of my favorite quotes that I learned through the recovery process was, if you're playing a game of catch and you don't throw the ball back, what happens? Game over. So I just kind of lived my life around that concept of not throwing the ball back. Like, they try so many ways to come after me. they've tried to kidnap my son twice. They've tried to kidnap me. And I can't put too much energy into it. I have to just ignore them. Which is hard. It's
Yeah.
not easy, but I try to, like I said, to live my life around not throwing the ball back and realizing even even getting upset and giving them any kind of energy is giving them something, and it's giving them that ball. So it's hard to get to that place. And I think it took at least 10 years for me to get there, but um I don't know. It's just so much of like your mindset. Like me 10 years ago thought every time they made a lie about me that I had to prove that it wasn't true and I had to do this, this, and this. And now I'm at the point where, okay, whatever. I don't care. They leave shitty comments on in the review section on my podcast saying I'm a liar and all this stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, whatever. I don't care.
But
They're
it's
not
like
as they're not as discreet as they think they are.
it's taken you 10 years, right? You said since
Yeah.
you've gotten
To
out.
get to the point where I'm just like, I don't care. Like so many of my friends are just like, are you scared of your parents? And I'm not anymore. I mean, I've already survived the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I've survived things that were worse than death. And I think my journey of healing was realizing that it can't get any worse than it was. So I only had one place to go. So as long as I kept on climbing.
Yes. And it's just so amazing to hear your story. You're doing the podcast, you're, putting yourself out there. Other projects that you're looking to dive into as you're, not only, healing for yourself, but, also growing in the social media. What can we see from you in the future?
Well, I actually just opened a nonprofit called the After the Last Sale Foundation. And it's me and two other survivors of trauma. One is a trafficking survivor, and the other more domestic violence, though trafficking was kind of messed in a way. But amazing women, and we are basically focusing on the after. And I've listened to my podcast. I listened to the first episode the other night, and I said it in that episode that saving a victim doesn't end after the last sale. And that's basically what my foundation is all about, is supporting survivors like me, that are getting an apartment for the first time, that, I just had a lot of dental work done and really could not afford it. And maxing out credit cards. It was
Mm,
ridiculous what I had to do to get it out, or my teeth out. And I still can't even wear my dentures because they trigger me.
mm,
But paying for legal fees, fees for school supplies, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Right now, all the organizations that are out there are amazing resources, but they focus so much on like the emergency crisis side of surviving, and they don't have the funding to be able to continue to help people that have been gone for 13 years. And like me, being gone 13 years, I still need help every once in a while. Like when I had the dental, like I said, when I had the dental work done, it would have been great to have someone help pay for that, because it was directly a result, like all the teeth rot
mm.
from the trafficking. I mean, I could tell you exactly what happened that led down the huge path of what happened to my teeth. So that's kind of my project now. I mean, I hate to call it a project, my passion, I think, is a better word,
Passion.
but I've been wanting to open a nonprofit forever, and it just happened out of nowhere. A good friend that owns an organization donated to get me the money to pay all the fees and go through everything. And now I get to answer that awesome question of, do you have a job, and say, yes, I'm CEO of a company, and they say, what is your income? Negative 5,000. I'm like, it's a nonprofit. I don't make any money off of it. I don't take a salary. None of us are taking salaries. Everything is going right back to survivors.
But that's an important step
Hmm.
for not only maybe your healing, but also for these young people. Most of the time, I'm assuming they're young. They could be older too, but coming
Yeah.
back to the world is just, where do you go? Where do you start? And
Hmm.
here you're offering a bit of.
Well, it's like, it was maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. I finally got a new hair dryer and flat iron, the thing that makes your hair flat for all the men, like straight. I finally got new ones. They were bought by the man that kidnapped and trafficked me, and it was like, I couldn't afford to get anything new. So every time I did my hair, I was constantly reminded, but we have to leave everything behind, everything. And one of the parts of the grooming process is giving lavish items, like those shoes. They were maybe $30, if that, probably even cheaper, but I loved them. I had a pair of red heels that I loved. I had a car that was in my father's name that I had to give up. I mean, we leave everything behind. And in some extreme cases, I know one survivor, when um she reached out to me, I got the police to her. She didn't even have a pair of pants on. She just had an oversized t-shirt, nothing under it, and then was thrown into a shelter. So she had nothing except a t-shirt. So there there needs to be support, because we struggle for the rest of our lives. I mean, like I said, I still have to pay all my bills, because I can't get that thing out of my head that someone's going to take the money and use it against me. So the services shouldn't stop. So that's what my foundation's going to do, is support people that have been gone for a while, past the two. I mean, I think it's like 2 years after you escape. That's considered like the emergency crisis. So we're going to pick up where everyone else leaves off. So, and it's not just because they can't, it's so they don't have to, because they've got, so, like, all the other organizations have so much stuff to focus on. And there's a lot out there that focus on different things, but that's just where we're going to focus on. So I went to my local anti-trafficking organization to ask for help with the teeth. And I could see the look in the director's face. They just didn't have the money. And I understood it was kind of a, what's the worst that can happen? They say no kind of thing.
Mhm.
So that's what inspired me to open after the last sale. So now if someone comes up to him and says, hey, I really need to get dental work, then he can refer them over to my foundation and we'll pay for it, or part of it, do what we can.
So I'll be leaving that information in the show notes. So
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful for our society and for those who have been forgotten, because sadly
Mm-hmm.
survivors, they get looked over, they get many times ignored, and even by family. And there's something that I wanted to bring up to kind of conclude, because we're talking about survivors and the importance of really lifting them up and supporting them. Maybe like a few months ago or several months ago, you were bringing to my attention in our personal conversations about, like, especially on TikTok, how there are reports of false trafficking, where there's like an
Mm-hmm.
influencer and they'll be like, oh, I almost got trafficked. And just I think it was last week or less than a week ago, I was seeing that this girl, this woman, has been arrested because she was on her TikTok. I believe it was on either TikTok or Instagram Live, whichever or whatever. And she was saying how there was these two people and they were, trying to nab my son. And then these two people, came forward and were just like, hey, we're just people shopping.
Yeah.
And uh
Well,
Well, what I want to ask is, how damaging is that, in your opinion, to the movement, like especially the movement that you're trying to do? How damaging is it to the cause?
It's devastating. I mean, category 5 EF or hurricane EF5 tornado devastating. Um and there it's really complex to get into it, but I don't know what video you're talking about. I've seen some similar to that where women are just screaming at random men that are just walking in their direction. Um, and it's the stranger danger. It was taught to us when we're young. It's carried on where we're teaching it to our kids, but the danger is within the family more often than not. I think it's close to 90% of victims of child um child pornography, sex trafficking, and all of that know the people that are doing it to them. But the other way, one thing that I've been starting to talk about is, I mean, when you talk to a child, what exactly is a stranger to them? Because they don't know who their teacher is when they meet their teacher at school, but they trust them. Because so it's like if someone's walks up and is nice to mommy, are they a stranger? So I'm trying to break that stigma of stranger danger for kids, but also for adults too. Traffickers, they're very methodical in the way that they take people. They work and groom people for months. It's not something that happens overnight. You're not snatched and grabbed, though those things do happen. But it makes it, number one, hard to believe survivors. I got, and I still to this day, people don't understand how I don't remember everything. And even still today with my story, when I share, I'm not believed. And I don't know if it's that people are just like, she's a flat out liar, or they just don't want to believe that trafficking can be that close to them. It's easier if it happened on an island in the Caribbean, or if it's the creepy guy at Walmart, because you just avoid that. But it's making it dangerous because, I mean, men are getting hurt, women are getting hurt because people are just so hyper vigilant. And that's amazing that people are more aware, but they're not aware of where the true danger is. So, like my aunts, for example, none of them did anything to help me. And even today, if I called one of my aunts, I mean, I've been completely disowned. Any questions I asked is, oh, well, I don't think I could be able to answer them for you, and yada yada, this, that, and the next. So it's like, it makes it hard because it's the parents, it's the aunts, the husbands, the boyfriends, girlfriends, wives. I mean, it's still so bizarre to me where people are like, I can't believe your mother would do that to you. And I'm like, but my father, that's totally believable,
Mhm.
so, but the fake stories, like, oh my God, I was almost trafficked. This creepy guy followed me. Okay, you're in a Walmart that has cans of soup and so many things. Make a damn scene, scream, do something to keep attention to yourself. And people just aren't doing that. But as long as they're have that false sense of security that, okay, well, this guy followed me and I called my boyfriend and I got out of there, I was fine. Well, are you paying attention to what your boyfriend is doing? Is he grooming you? Is he getting you to do things that you don't want to do, that you don't think about, that you don't want to do? Because when I was kidnapped, I went willingly, and I didn't even realize that I didn't actually go willingly until weeks after I was taken. But how is anyone going to understand how someone goes willingly to their own kidnapping and then realizes 2 weeks in, wait a minute, I've been kidnapped? Like, it is harmful. And I wish people would stop talking about it, but it's such a trendy topic right now, as sick as it is to say that. And I'm telling you, if I open my Twitter, and see Jeffrey Epstein's name, I'm just going to lose my mind. Like, I'm tired of hearing about it. It's like everyone's focused on Epstein, where trafficking is no longer happening, but they're ignoring the rest of the world where it is happening. So it's hard to break that stigma and get through to people. Like, listen, who cares about a stupid list? It doesn't exist in the way that you think it does. And even if it got revealed, you can't do a damn thing about it. The victims need to come forward. And why would they? Look at Amber Heard. She got sued for $50 million.
Mhm.
She was just as much a victim as he was, if not more. That's unpopular opinion, I'm sure, but it's the climate and the way that people are talking about things. The survivor world is so toxic. I mean, I'm sure you see it too.
Mhm. Why do you think there are people who do this, like, false, claims of I was almost trafficked? Because with this the example that I'm using, like I said, the people whom she was calling out actually came forward, and they came out to be totally clean. And this
Yeah.
this person, the influencer, I guess, do you think that they're doing it for popularity, that they want
Oh, it's
maybe
uh,
sympathy?
I hate saying it, but yeah, I think the majority of it is for clout. And, they see, I mean, I have one video on my TikTok that went over 2 million views in just a couple of days. And social media is about that instant gratification, like posting a video, posting a post, and watching the attention that comes to it, which is how social media was designed and what it was designed to do. I remember back when Instagram first came out, it was only pictures. You couldn't really write anything. And there were psychologists and psychiatrists that came out worried that it was going to increase narcissism because people were going to constantly care about their looks, and it's only gotten worse, and it's going to continue to get worse. I mean, I hate the government, but I really wish they would ban social media. I can't stand it anymore. That, and there's traffickers on there too. I had girls that reached out to me a couple years ago that were said that they were survivors, and they were still in a trafficking ring, still being trafficked and attempting to recruit me and take me back into trafficking. I have a soft spot for survivors. I just want to hug them all and give them the world. So, it's a cesspool everywhere.
And you brought something up which I think people forget. You brought up actually two things. One about the Epstein island. I mean, we know about it, but currently, nothing's happening there.
No.
While everyone's attention is looking that way,
Mhm.
there is so much ignorance regarding the trafficking that is still happening, and we're not even talking about international. We're talking about
Just
within
here.
within the United States, within cities and towns. That's being
It's
forgotten. That's not, people aren't even caring about it.
Well, it's like it's taken on a whole life of itself. I actually, a few months ago, saw a woman make a video. I believe she's part of an organization. I know she at least makes videos for them, and I won't say who she is or what the organization is for privacy reasons. She made a claim that the Biden administration was taking unaccompanied minors from the border and sending them to the Ukraine. And that's why Russia invaded the Ukraine to rescue these kids. I'm what? I'm like where are you getting this? It's so far from the truth. Number one, Russia is the number one human trafficking country in the world. um but it's like it takes the focus off what's really happening at the border, where kids are being sent over with their traffickers. And people aren't, that's the thing, is like it's controlling the conversation and controlling the narrative to steer away from what's really happening and where it's really happening and how it is. And then you got to sit down and think to yourself, who are the people that benefit the most from these stories existing? It's definitely not the survivors, it's the traffickers. So when people put out that kind of false information, all they're doing is distracting from the truth, and it's keeping the traffickers from hiding in plain sight. There was a pedophile ring taken down in the late 90s called Club Orchid and Club Wonderland. Orchid was in the United States, Wonderland was international. The process to get into that club is identical to one that was just discovered by a hacker within the past year. It's been 25 years and they're still doing it the same exact way. So these kinds of stories, they're helping them to do it the same exact way. And when this hacker came out, it was actually on another podcast. I'm wearing his merch now. And so many people watched that episode and thought, oh, the elite, oh, the politicians. And I'm like, my mind goes, okay, they have to submit so many pictures and videos of them assaulting a child. What's the easiest person, or who's the easiest person? Their own children. Mm-hmm. Everyone else's mind goes to, oh, well, the elite kidnapped some kid. I'm like, how does your mind go there? Like, I don't understand. And it's probably because I lived that life and other people don't. And I'm just like, I can't. It's like the zip tie thing. Every time it pops up, I share it to my friend. I'm like, oh God, it's back. And she's like, you talk about it like it's a clown or something scary. I'm like, it's obnoxious. And us survivors are fighting really hard to end it. But I think it was less than a month ago, Polaris Project posted on their Instagram that not a single trafficker or a trafficking survivor was story started with a rose on their car. Like, they're just not true, and they've been proved to be false over and over again. But people, they can find a post on social media somewhere whose sisters, cousins, boyfriends, aunts, whoever happened to, but they're not looking where they're going to find the truth. And that's at the anti-trafficking organizations like the Human Trafficking Hotline, Polaris Project, Shared Hope International. I mean, if these stories were true, you would be hearing it in the news every day, all day, every day, and you're not. You're hearing about a teacher that trafficked kids, a parent that trafficked kids, a foster parent. Like, that's the stories that you're hearing in the news every day. Well, maybe people aren't, but if you look, you'll find it. I signed up for a sex trafficking news Google alert, and I had it to come in as they came. I had to change the setting because like my email was going crazy. Like every 5 minutes, a new article was coming out. I'm like, it's happening. People are being arrested all over the place, but it's people that are close to your children and close to you. And as long as you're listening to all the strange stories that come out on social media, you're looking away, and there's only one person that benefits from that, and that's the traffickers. It makes you an easier target.
And you made a huge point right now that people want to hear the stories of the ones doing the trafficking are just the elite or politicians, but then they ignore and I'm not denying that it doesn't happen. Most likely it does happen. Mm-hmm. However, like you were saying, who are the ones like in bulk, like in the masses who are doing it? It's happening by people whom these children, these kids, young adults, whom they trust. Look at the Catholic Church. Yeah. I mean, they all trusted these priests or nuns, whatever, and it happened for several years. But in the beginning, no one wanted to believe it. It was easier to believe that some random stranger came and
Mhm.
abducted them. But to
And
hear that a priest did it, it's like, oh, and that's why victims were silent.
even now that story gets twisted. People think that the Catholic Church makes priests pedophiles. It's not. It's the opposite. The pedophiles choose the jobs and the places where they're going to have easy access to children and where they're going to be trusted. So that's another hill to climb. But um yeah, my grandfather actually was a reverend, I want to say in the Protestant church, even though I wasn't Protestant.
Mhm.
And he started a coalition a long time ago. I read an article about it. I had no idea about it until recently. That was to help priests that had not been accused and were not pedophiles, that were dealing with a lot of things. And he was working on changing the handled within the church thing that they would do. But, it is, and it's, the world is scary. And I don't think people really understand that it's, it's like right outside your door, right in front of your face. And you can't protect yourself from a fantasy. So everything that I've been doing since I started sharing was to break that fantasy and break that stigma and tell people, like, my story, as crazy as it is not unique. I hear from survivors on a semi-daily basis that went through the same thing. And I mean, I'm a survivor of the elite, so to speak, but they were like less than what, 5% of the people that I was trafficked to. It was just a very small portion.
Mhm.
But if they only live in Hollywood and they only live in DC, you just don't go there and you're safe. But it's such a false sense of security, and you're really keeping yourself safe from a fantasy.
Thank you, Kelly, for really bringing awareness and also sharing the healing journey that takes place after leaving that dark, terrible world of sex trafficking. And I hope that when people will hear you and come across your nonprofit, that it'll help several people, and that many more will come to assist and help out with this organization.
Yeah, I really hope so. I'm really excited about it. It's been a passion of mine for a long time, though. I realized how much I really hate running a business. But in the long run, helping people is going to make it so much worth it. And we need more stuff like that. We need survivors to open up their own organizations and help. It's No one knows the sex trafficking world better than a survivor. And if we want to bring it down and bring an end to this, which there's never going to be a complete end to it, but if we want to make changes that matter, the stories of survivors, not just what they went through, but what they went through after they escaped, is going to help. I mean, one of the main missions of the After the Last Sale Foundation is to provide things for survivors to keep them from going back. I was lucky that and I don't want to say was strong enough because I don't want to invalidate anyone, but I was lucky that I never did go back, no matter how many times I thought about it. But that's not the case for a lot. I know one survivor or victim, I should say, that's in her 60s and has no desire to leave because she's been being trafficked for over 40 years now. And it's like, what kind of life is she going to have being 60 years old, entering into this new crazy world? I know
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to at that age. So, awareness is not just about the gory details or what Epstein did, or who Epstein was friends with, or who was in his black book. That's not awareness. Awareness is the teachers. I mean, they had a daycare. Um, I can't remember where it was at. It was somewhere in the Midwest, and a person in Atlanta, Georgia got arrested and found out this overnight daycare was trafficking kids. And if that person hadn't gotten arrested, they never would have found out. So here's a daycare where parents that work overnight were paying for this person to watch their kid just essentially sleep was trafficking kids. It's that close to home. So if you're not looking for the signs and you're not talking to your kids and getting your kids to talk to you, then you just have just as much a chance of getting caught up in it as anyone else does. And it's scary, and I hate spreading a message of fear, but education it comes a long way. And a lot of survivors started sharing around the same time I did, and that's what all of us want, is to share experience so no one has to go through it.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing your experiences as well as your words of survival and hope. And I really hope that the listeners may, learn something from today's interview. Would you like to
Okay.
leave any final words for the audience?
Um, be gentle, not just with other people, but with yourselves. Like I said, it took a long time to validate my story to myself, and be gentle with yourself. If you haven't yet, if you haven't forgiven yourself for allowing it to happen and gone through all of that, it doesn't matter. There's no time frame. You can do it today, you can do it in 20 years from now, but just don't be so hard on yourself. It took a lot of strength to survive the things that I went through and that so many other survivors went through of all kinds of trauma. The strength is there inside of you. You just have to find it. And it may be piled under 10 miles of crap, but it's there. You just got to keep getting to it and just hold on to it. And I mean, like I said, God was the constant I had in my life that kept me going. It doesn't have to be the answer for everyone, but they have something. Just grab on to that, whether it's hope or whatever it is, and just keep fighting the fight. There is life on the outside. I have such an amazing life now, and I work with survivors and am friends with survivors that have made it out. Like, you can do it. You have to keep digging and you have to keep fighting.
So thank you so much,
Thank
Kelly, for
you.
just also educating us and helping us to be more aware of the reality of what is happening in the sex trafficking world and how it's closer to home than what people imagine. So thank you for bringing that to this podcast. And for those listening, thank you for sticking it out with us on this episode. You have been listening to Kelly from the Unbroken Podcast. Go and check that out. Subscribe, follow her work. I'll be leaving her links in the show notes. And thank you also to everyone who has been listening to my podcast, The Truth That Heals. Every listen is it's I'm
I
very
love your
grateful
podcast.
for all of my listeners, and I'm grateful for you, Kelly, for being a
I know,
listener.
when I told my husband I was going to be a guest on your podcast again, he's like, "Do I know this guy?" And I explained it. I'm like, "The guy I stalked on Twitter to be on my podcast." And he's like, "Oh, okay, I know who you're talking about now." I don't know how one of your tweets popped up on my feed, but I'm like, "Come on my podcast, please come on my podcast." And now we're really good friends.
Well, that's the life of podcasting. You also got to market. You also got to put yourself out there, and at times it can be
Exhausting.
inconvenient, like exactly exhausting. But hey, I've opened a lot of doors, and we were able to meet through Twitter, and here we are going on each other's shows doing podcasts. And thank you to everyone who has been listening to the Truth That Heals podcast.